The Medium Who Composed with the Dead. A Brief Biography of Rosemary Brown, 1916 to 2001. Early Life and Influences. Rosemary Brown was born on April 8, 1916, into a modest but intellectually engaged household that would shape her early interests and spiritual inclinations. Raised in the heart of the British countryside, she was surrounded by a strong sense of tradition and an appreciation for nature, both of which would later influence her worldview. From an early age, she exhibited an insatiable curiosity, often spending her days exploring the natural world and contemplating its deeper mysteries. Her fascination with the unseen elements of existence first emerged in childhood, manifesting in her vivid imagination and a growing awareness of the metaphysical. Brown's formative years were marked by a keen exposure to spiritual and philosophical discussions within her home. Her mother, a firm believer in theosophy, introduced her to the works of Helena Blavatsky and other esoteric writers, which planted the seeds for Brown's lifelong pursuit of spiritual knowledge. This early exposure was complemented by her education at a local secondary school, where she excelled in literature and history, subjects that deepened her appreciation for the philosophical and mystical traditions of the past. Though her formal schooling did not provide an explicit foundation in spiritualism, her voracious reading habits and intellectual curiosity led her to explore occult literature independently. Throughout her teenage years, Brown's passion for spiritual matters grew, fueled by both personal reflection and the influences of the broader cultural and political landscape of the time. The 1920s and 1930s, marked by rapid social change and an increasing interest in the supernatural, provided fertile ground for her emerging beliefs. While still in her youth, she began to experience moments of what she would later describe as premonitions and psychic impressions, further solidifying her conviction in the existence of a spiritual dimension beyond what conventional science acknowledged. These early occurrences would serve as the foundation for her future work as a spiritualist, guiding her toward a life dedicated to uncovering the mysteries of the unseen world. A mind open to the unknown. As Rosemary Brown transitioned into her teenage years, her intellectual and spiritual development flourished in tandem. Her exposure to theosophical literature, combined with her natural inquisitiveness, led her to explore a wide array of spiritual philosophies. She was particularly drawn to the works of Alice A. Bailey, whose writings on spiritual evolution and theosophical esotericism resonated deeply with her. At the age of 17, she began reading Theosophy by A.P. Sinnett, a book that outlined the foundational principles of theosophical thought. This text, along with the works of Alice A. Bailey and Charles Waddell Leadbeater, introduced her to the idea of a hidden spiritual hierarchy guiding human development from the unseen world. These ideas not only fascinated her but also laid the groundwork for her later understanding of spiritualism as a means of accessing higher wisdom. Brown's early teenage years were also marked by encounters with mysticism in practical forms. She attended spiritualist gatherings in small village halls and listened to seances that attempted to communicate with the deceased. However, rather than simply accepting these experiences at face value, she approached them with a critical yet open mind, seeking to understand the mechanics behind the phenomena. This desire for intellectual rigor was nurtured by her education, as she studied literature and history with a particular focus on the philosophical underpinnings of different spiritual traditions. The British spiritualist movement, still in its early stages of public engagement, had a growing presence in the 1930s, and Brown found herself captivated by the idea that consciousness could transcend the physical body. As part of her intellectual development, she began correspondences with prominent spiritualist thinkers of the time, engaging in discussions that would shape her understanding of the field. While still a teenager, she attended lectures by well-known spiritualists who emphasized the potential for personal development through spiritual practices. These experiences solidified her belief that spiritualism was not merely about contacting the dead, but also about self-discovery and the expansion of consciousness. This perspective would guide her later work, as she sought to bridge the gap between spiritualist philosophy and scientific inquiry. Her early years were defined by a dual commitment to intellectual exploration and an openness to the unknown, a balance that would remain central to her identity as a spiritualist and a seeker of truth. Formative spiritual experiences. The early 1940s marked a pivotal turning point in Rosemary Brown's spiritual journey, as she encountered experiences that would forever alter her perception of life and consciousness. Still in her early 20s at the time, she became deeply engaged with the spiritualist movement that was experiencing a resurgence in Britain. The 1930s and 1940s saw a growing public interest in spiritualism, driven in part by the search for solace in the face of political turmoil and the horrors of World War II. Brown, who had already been cultivating a strong intellectual foundation in spiritual philosophy, found herself drawn to the lived experiences of those who claimed to communicate with the deceased. One of the most transformative moments in her formative years occurred in late 1942, when she attended a séance in a small London spiritualist hall. It was there that she first experienced what she would later describe as a profound spiritual impression. During the séance, she felt an overwhelming presence of an unseen force, a sensation that transcended mere intellectual curiosity and struck at the core of her being. Though she was not yet a medium, the experience left a lasting impact, reinforcing her belief that spiritualism was not simply an intellectual pursuit but an embodied reality. This moment solidified her conviction that the spiritual world was an integral part of human existence rather than an abstract metaphysical concept. Following this pivotal experience, Brown began to actively seek out spiritualist meetings and discussions, immersing herself in the practical and philosophical aspects of the movement. It was during this period that she developed a deep interest in psychic development, a discipline that sought to enhance one's ability to receive and interpret spiritual impressions. This fascination led her to correspond with Harry Price, the esteemed director of the National Laboratory of Psychical Research, an institution known for both its scientific rigor and its exploration of the supernatural. In 1943, she wrote to Price, seeking guidance on the phenomena she was beginning to encounter. His response, while cautious and methodical, acknowledged the possibility that some spiritualist experiences could not be easily explained through conventional scientific methodology. His writings and research, which balanced skepticism with an open-minded approach, deeply influenced Brown's evolving perspective. By 1945, as the war drew to a close, Rosemary Brown had embarked on a path of spiritual exploration that would eventually lead to her own groundbreaking contributions to the field. Her engagement with the spiritualist community, combined with her intellectual rigor and personal experiences, positioned her as a formidable voice in the movement. With a growing awareness of the potential for psychic development, she began to explore techniques for enhancing sensitivity to spiritual impressions, laying the groundwork for her later work as a psychic and medium. These formative years in the 1940s not only deepened her personal commitment to spiritualism but also equipped her with the tools necessary to contribute meaningfully to the field. As the spiritualist movement gained momentum in the post-war years, Brown was ready to take on a more active role in shaping its future. Key contributions to spiritualism. As Rosemary Brown deepened her involvement in spiritualism, she quickly became a prominent figure in the British spiritualist movement, making significant contributions that shaped the field in the mid-20th century. Her role as a psychic and medium placed her at the forefront of the growing interest in spiritual communication, particularly during the post-war period when public fascination with the supernatural was at one of its peaks. Unlike many of her contemporaries, who often approached spiritualism from a strictly traditional perspective, Brown combined her intuitive gifts with a rigorous intellectual framework, making her a compelling voice for spiritualism in both academic and public spheres. One of Brown's most notable contributions came in her work as a media personality. During the 1940s and 1950s, she was among the few spiritualists who successfully engaged with the British public through radio and print media, using these platforms to educate and inform audiences about spiritualist principles. In 1947, she made her first appearance on the BBC radio program Echoes of the Mind, a pioneering show that explored parapsychological phenomena and the nature of consciousness. Her insights and personal experiences lent credibility to the discussion, and she became a frequent commentator on spiritualism for both national and regional programs. Her articulate and thoughtful approach helped demystify the subject for a broader audience, fostering a more intellectual engagement with spiritualist ideas. Brown's contributions extended beyond public broadcasting to written works that would later become foundational texts in the field. In 1949, she published The Light and the Darkness, a groundbreaking exploration of the spiritualist experience that combined personal narrative with philosophical inquiry. The book delved into the nature of consciousness, the structure of the spiritual world, and the dynamics of psychic communication, offering readers a comprehensive vision that was both accessible and intellectually rigorous. Unlike most spiritualist literature of the time, which often leaned toward esoteric mysticism, Brown's work maintained a clear and logical structure, making it especially influential among those who approached spiritualism from a rationalist perspective. The book was widely praised for its ability to bridge the gap between empirical investigation and spiritual experience, and it remains one of her most enduring literary achievements. In addition to her work in media and literature, Brown played a pivotal role in advancing the role of psychic development within spiritualist practice. Drawing from her own experiences and studies with Harry Price, she developed a comprehensive approach to training individuals in psychic sensitivity, emphasizing both intuitive development and self-awareness. She believed that the ability to receive spiritual impressions was not an exclusive gift, but a skill that could be cultivated through disciplined practice. This belief led her to establish a series of workshops and classes, particularly in the 1950s, designed to help individuals enhance their psychic abilities. These efforts were instrumental in shaping the spiritualist movement in Britain, as they provided a structured framework for seekers to explore their own spiritual potential in a systematic and methodical manner. Brown's influence also extended to public debates and discussions on the nature of consciousness and the afterlife. Throughout the 1950s, she participated in several high-profile debates with leading scientists and skeptics, often engaging in public forums to defend the legitimacy of spiritualist phenomena. Her articulate arguments and willingness to engage in rational discourse helped shift public perception of spiritualism from a fringe belief system to a more mainstream subject of inquiry. In particular, her 1950 debate with a group of British scientists at the University of London drew widespread attention, not only for its intellectual rigor but also for her ability to present spiritualist principles in a way that resonated with both lay audiences and academic critics. By the early 1960s, Brown had firmly established herself as one of the foremost voices in British spiritualism. Her contributions to the field encompassed a diverse range of activities, from broadcasting and writing to public engagements and psychic development training. More than just a medium or a spiritualist, she was a shaper of the movement, using her platform to advocate for a more holistic and scientifically informed approach to spiritual exploration. Her legacy, shaped during these formative years, would continue to influence the development of spiritualism in Britain and beyond, as she remained a guiding presence in the field throughout the decades that followed. The influence of Rosemary Brown on spiritualism in the 20th century. Rosemary Brown's contributions to the spiritualist movement extended far beyond her immediate circles, playing a pivotal role in shaping the evolution of spiritualism in the 20th century. As a medium, writer, and public figure, she helped legitimize spiritualist practices within a broader cultural and intellectual framework. Her work intersected with some of the most significant spiritual and scientific developments of the era, allowing her to influence not only the spiritualist community but also the broader public discourse on consciousness, the afterlife, and the nature of human awareness. During the 1940s and 1950s, spiritualism in Britain experienced a marked resurgence, fueled by public fascination with the supernatural and the enduring desire to connect with departed loved ones. Brown's prominence within this movement coincided with this period of renewed interest, and her work provided a bridge between traditional spiritualist practices and emerging scientific inquiries into the nature of consciousness. Unlike many spiritualists of the time, who often adhered to a strictly esoteric view of the afterlife, Brown approached spiritualist communication with a sense of intellectual rigor, encouraging a dialogue between spiritualist experience and empirical observation. This approach helped to position spiritualism as a legitimate field of study rather than a mystical cult, attracting both adherents and critical observers alike. One of the most significant ways in which Brown contributed to the evolution of spiritualism was through her engagement with contemporary scientific thought. The mid-20th century was a period of rapid advancement in psychology and parapsychology, with researchers like Carl Jung and J.B. Rhine investigating extraordinary human capacities such as telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. Brown was deeply interested in these developments, and she saw parallels between the spiritualist experience and the emerging field of parapsychology. She frequently participated in discussions with scientists and philosophers who were exploring the boundaries of human consciousness, using these engagements to refine her own understanding of spiritual communication. This interdisciplinary approach helped to integrate spiritualist ideas into the broader intellectual landscape of the time, allowing for a more nuanced and sophisticated exploration of the afterlife and psychic phenomena. In the post-war years, Brown's public presence was instrumental in making spiritualism more accessible to a wider audience. The 1950s and early 1960s saw an explosion in media coverage of spiritualist activity, with television and radio programs increasingly incorporating discussions on the paranormal and the supernatural. Brown's appearances on BBC Radio, along with her public lectures and writings, contributed to a more mainstream awareness of spiritualist principles. Her ability to articulate complex spiritualist concepts in a way that was accessible to the general public helped to shift the perception of spiritualism from one of esoteric fascination to a field of serious philosophical and psychological inquiry. This, in turn, encouraged more individuals to explore spiritualist ideas, leading to the growth of spiritualist centers, study groups, and research institutions across Britain. One of the most enduring aspects of Brown's influence was her role in advancing the role of psychic development within spiritualist practice. During the 1950s and 1960s, she established a number of structured programs designed to train individuals in the refinement of their psychic abilities, emphasizing the importance of discipline, self-awareness, and ethical responsibility. These efforts helped to professionalize the field of spiritualism in a way that distinguished it from fraudulent or sensationalist activities. By providing a structured framework for personal and spiritual growth, Brown contributed to a more mature and accountable spiritualist movement, one that emphasized personal development alongside communication with the spiritual realm. As the 20th century progressed, Brown's contributions to spiritualism continued to resonate within both academic and spiritualist circles. Her work laid the groundwork for future generations of spiritualists who sought to reconcile spiritual experience with scientific inquiry. By the 1970s and 1980s, her influence was evident in the growing interest in spiritualism and parapsychology, as many of the questions she had raised in her writing and public engagements became central to contemporary discussions on consciousness and the nature of reality. Through her articulate and thoughtful engagement with spiritualist philosophy, Rosemary Brown helped to ensure that spiritualism remained a vital and evolving field of study, rather than being relegated to the fringes of intellectual inquiry. Her legacy, built on a foundation of clarity, intellectual rigor, and public engagement, continues to shape the spiritualist movement to this day. The personal philosophy and beliefs of Rosemary Brown. At the heart of Rosemary Brown's spiritualist work was a deeply personal philosophy rooted in the belief that spiritualism was not merely a means of communicating with the deceased, but a path towards self-awareness and existential understanding. Her beliefs were shaped by a combination of intellectual inquiry, personal experience, and a commitment to rational discourse within the spiritualist movement. Unlike some of her contemporaries, who approached spiritualism through a purely mystical or esoteric framework, Brown sought to reconcile spiritualist phenomena with scientific and philosophical principles, believing that the two could coexist in a meaningful dialogue. Her personal beliefs centered on the interconnectedness of all beings, the evolution of consciousness, and the idea that the spiritual world was as much a part of existence as the material world. One of the most distinctive aspects of Brown's philosophy was her emphasis on the duality of existence, a theme that ran through much of her writing and public discourse. She often spoke of the interplay between light and darkness, not as opposing forces but as complementary aspects of consciousness. This duality, she believed, was essential to understanding the human experience and the nature of the afterlife. In her book The Light and the Darkness, she explored this concept in depth, arguing that spiritual development required individuals to confront both their conscious and unconscious elements. Just as the material world was shaped by both light and shadow, so too was the spiritual. This belief informed her approach to psychic development, where she encouraged practitioners to cultivate a balanced awareness rather than seeking only positive spiritual experiences. By embracing the full spectrum of consciousness, she believed individuals could achieve a more comprehensive understanding of themselves and their place in the spiritual world. This sense of balance extended to her views on free will and personal responsibility. Brown rejected the notion that spiritualists were passive recipients of supernatural intervention. Instead, she believed that individuals played an active role in shaping their own spiritual destinies. For her, spiritualism was not a form of escapism but a discipline that required self-reflection, ethical consideration, and an ongoing commitment to personal growth. She often emphasized that spiritual guidance was a tool rather than a crutch, arguing that individuals must ultimately take responsibility for their decisions in both the physical and spiritual realms. This belief made her a unique figure within the spiritualist movement, as she encouraged a sense of agency rather than dependence on external forces. Another key component of Brown's philosophy was her belief in the continued development of consciousness beyond death. She argued that the afterlife was not a static state of being but a dynamic process of spiritual evolution. This concept was central to her understanding of spiritualist communication, as she believed that those on the other side continued to grow and develop their awareness in the same way that they did in life. This perspective influenced her interactions with fellow spiritualists, as she encouraged a vision of death not as an end but as a continuation of the self. Her writings often emphasized the idea that spiritual communication was not solely about receiving messages from the dead, but about engaging in a meaningful exchange that could contribute to both personal and collective spiritual progress. Brown's personal beliefs also reflected her commitment to ethical integrity within the spiritualist movement. She was a vocal advocate for responsible practice, rejecting fraudulent mediums and emphasizing the importance of honest, ethical communication between the living and the dead. Her work in psychic development programs was driven by this belief, as she sought to cultivate a genuine understanding of spiritual phenomena rather than merely seeking dramatic or sensationalistic experiences. She viewed spiritualism as a moral and philosophical path, one that required individuals to approach the spiritual world with both curiosity and reverence. Ultimately, Rosemary Brown's personal philosophy was one of harmony, balance, and intellectual rigor. Her approach to spiritualism was not defined by mysticism for its own sake, but by a desire to understand the deeper truths of existence in a way that was both meaningful and intellectually coherent. Through her writings, public discourse, and personal practice, she demonstrated that spiritualism could be a source of profound insight and personal growth, rather than a mere curiosity or form of entertainment. This core philosophy, shaped by her own experiences and intellectual inquiries, lay at the foundation of her enduring influence in the spiritualist movement. Challenges and controversies. Despite her growing prominence in the spiritualist community, Rosemary Brown was not immune to the skepticism and criticism that often accompanied those associated with the supernatural and the paranormal. Throughout her career, she faced numerous challenges, ranging from outright dismissal by mainstream scientists to more subtle, but no less disheartening, forms of doubt from members of the public. Her work, while widely respected among spiritualists, was frequently subjected to rigorous scrutiny, and at times, her credibility was called into question. These challenges were exacerbated by the broader cultural climate of the mid-20th century, which often placed spiritualist phenomena under suspicion when subjected to scientific analysis. One of the most notable points of contention was Brown's engagement with scientific inquiry. While she was deeply interested in the empirical study of psychic phenomena and often participated in discussions with parapsychologists and researchers, her spiritualist convictions placed her at odds with certain scientific viewpoints. The British National Laboratory of Psychical Research, an institution associated with both scientific inquiry and spiritualist investigation, became a focal point of these tensions. When Harry Price, the director of the laboratory, invited Brown to participate in controlled psychic experiments, their collaboration yielded both support and skepticism. Price, known for his methodical approach to researching the supernatural, offered a nuanced perspective that acknowledged the possibility of genuine psychic phenomena, yet remained skeptical of spiritualist claims that extended beyond the empirical realm. Brown, in turn, was often critical of scientific attempts to quantify spiritual experiences, arguing that the intangible nature of consciousness and the afterlife could not be fully captured through quantitative analysis. Their exchange highlighted the inherent difficulties in bridging the gap between spiritualist belief and scientific methodology, a tension that persisted for much of her career. Beyond the academic sphere, Brown also found herself at the center of public debates that sought to distinguish legitimate spiritualist inquiry from fraudulent or sensationalist displays. The 1950s were marked by a growing interest in the supernatural, which, in turn, gave rise to both genuine and deceptive spiritualist practices. As a result, Brown was often called upon to distinguish between authentic psychic communication and charlatanry. One of the most high-profile controversies of her career emerged in 1956, when she testified before a British parliamentary committee investigating spiritualist fraud. The committee, which was under pressure from skeptical scientists and social commentators, sought to determine whether spiritualist practices were grounded in genuine phenomena or were merely deceptive performances. Brown, despite her own reservations about the limitations of scientific verification, acknowledged the importance of distinguishing between authentic experiences and those that exploited public belief for personal gain. In her testimony, she emphasized the ethical responsibilities of spiritualists, arguing that genuine spiritualist practice required both intellectual rigor and a commitment to truth. While her testimony was praised by many in the spiritualist community, it also exposed the fragile position in which she and her colleagues found themselves, acknowledging the need for clarity and ethical boundaries while simultaneously defending the legitimacy of spiritual experiences. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Brown's career was her involvement in high-profile spiritualist debates. In 1950, during the height of the post-war spiritualist revival, she participated in a televised debate alongside a group of British scientists who were critical of spiritualist claims. The debate, which was broadcast on BBC and widely covered in the national press, provided a public forum for both supporters and skeptics of spiritualism. Brown's arguments, grounded in her extensive experience and research, were met with both admiration and criticism. Some viewers praised her for articulating complex spiritualist concepts in a clear and rational manner, while others accused her of making unfounded assertions that could not be empirically verified. The debate highlighted the broader cultural divide between those who saw spiritualism as a legitimate field of inquiry and those who dismissed it as pseudoscience. In the aftermath, Brown became a polarizing figure, admired by spiritualists as a defender of authentic spiritualist experience but viewed with skepticism by those who felt that spiritualist claims lacked scientific validity. These challenges, while daunting, did not deter Brown from her work. Rather, they reinforced her commitment to maintaining intellectual integrity within the spiritualist movement. She often acknowledged the need for rigorous self-examination within the field, advocating for the development of ethical standards and responsible practice. She was also a vocal critic of fraudulent mediums and deceptive spiritualist performances, using her platform to promote genuine spiritualist inquiry. In doing so, she helped to establish a more disciplined and ethical approach to spiritualism, one that emphasized philosophical and scientific engagement over mere supernatural spectacle. Despite the controversies that surrounded her throughout her career, Brown remained steadfast in her belief that spiritualism had an essential role to play in the exploration of human consciousness. Her willingness to engage with skeptics, scientists, and the public alike demonstrated her commitment to advancing the legitimacy of spiritualist phenomena. While some critics continued to dismiss her work as unverifiable, others recognized the significance of her contributions in shaping a more intellectually rigorous spiritualist movement. Through her resilience and intellectual engagement, Rosemary Brown ensured that spiritualism remained a subject of serious inquiry, rather than a marginal curiosity, in the broader landscape of 20th century thought. Collaborations and relationships in Rosemary Brown's spiritualist career. Rosemary Brown's spiritualist career was not one she pursued in isolation. Rather, it was shaped and enriched by her collaborations with some of the most prominent figures in the field, including Harry Price, John Haddon, and Dr. John Todd. These relationships were instrumental in advancing her understanding of psychic phenomena, refining her methodologies, and expanding the visibility of spiritualist research in both academic and public spheres. Each of these individuals brought their own unique perspectives and areas of expertise to their interactions with Brown, resulting in a dynamic exchange of ideas that deepened her contributions to spiritualism and helped her navigate the complex landscape of 20th century spiritualist thought. Harry Price, director of the National Laboratory of Psychical Research from 1936 to 1944 and later the chairman of the Psychical Research Foundation, was one of the most influential figures in Brown's early career. His methodological approach to investigating psychic phenomena, which combined scientific rigor with an openness to the supernatural, resonated deeply with Brown's own intellectual sensibility. Their collaboration began in the early 1940s, when Brown, still in her 20s, wrote to Price for guidance on the spiritual phenomena she was experiencing. Price, who had long been interested in the intersection of psychic research and spiritualism, was intrigued by her insights and encouraged her to engage with the broader field of parapsychology. Under Price's mentorship, Brown developed a deeper appreciation for the importance of empirical investigation in spiritualist research. She often participated in discussions at the National Laboratory of Psychical Research, where Price and his team conducted controlled experiments to explore the boundaries of human consciousness. These experiences influenced Brown's later work, as she brought a more structured and methodical approach to her spiritualist practices, emphasizing the need for accuracy and integrity in communication with the spiritual realm. However, their relationship was not without challenges, as Price was known for his critical stance towards spiritualist fraud and his insistence on scientific validation for all claims. Brown, while appreciative of his insights, often argued that the intangible nature of spiritual experiences defied the limitations of empirical measurement. Despite these differences, their collaboration exemplified a harmonious synergy between spiritualist intuition and scientific inquiry, offering a framework for understanding spiritual phenomena that remains a cornerstone of modern spiritualist discourse. Another pivotal figure in Brown's career was John Haddon, a well-known British spiritualist whose influence extended across both the spiritualist community and the broader public. Haddon was a respected medium and a charismatic figure who played a key role in promoting the spiritualist movement during its post-war resurgence. Brown's relationship with Haddon was multifaceted, encompassing both professional collaboration and intellectual debate. Haddon's work as a public speaker and writer provided Brown with opportunities to reach wider audiences, and the two often appeared together at spiritualist meetings, lectures, and radio broadcasts, where they discussed the philosophical and practical dimensions of spiritualist practice. Haddon's dynamic presence complemented Brown's thoughtful and articulate approach, creating a balanced and engaging dialogue that resonated with audiences. However, their collaboration was not without its tensions. Haddon, who was more inclined toward the performative aspects of spiritualist communication, occasionally clashed with Brown's emphasis on ethical and methodical practice. Brown, for her part, believed that Haddon's theatrical flair sometimes risked overshadowing the serious nature of spiritualist inquiry. Despite these disagreements, their interactions were marked by mutual respect, as both recognized the importance of maintaining a strong platform for spiritualism in a world increasingly skeptical of the supernatural. Dr. John Todd, a psychiatrist and spiritualist researcher, also played a significant role in Brown's career. Todd, who was known for his work bridging the fields of psychiatry and parapsychology, brought a clinical and psychological perspective to spiritualist phenomena, which complemented Brown's philosophical and empirical approach. Their collaboration centered on the exploration of altered states of consciousness and the psychological mechanisms underlying spiritual experiences. Todd's research on the connection between psychic phenomena and mental processes helped Brown refine her understanding of the interplay between the material and spiritual realms. Together, they investigated the nature of clairvoyance, mediumship, and other psychic abilities, often engaging in discussions with other researchers and clinicians to develop a more holistic understanding of spiritualist phenomena. One of their most notable collaborations was a series of studies on the psychological profiles of successful mediums, which provided valuable insights into the traits and experiences that contributed to effective spiritualist communication. These efforts underscored the importance of integrating psychological and spiritual frameworks to gain a deeper understanding of the phenomena they sought to study. The relationships Brown cultivated with Price, Haddon, and Todd were not merely professional. They also influenced her personal growth and expanded her capacity to engage with diverse perspectives within the spiritualist movement. Through her interactions with Price, she learned the value of empirical rigor, even as she maintained her belief in the intangible nature of spiritual experiences. Her work with Haddon provided her with a platform to reach broader audiences and refine her public voice, while her collaboration with Todd enriched her understanding of the psychological dimensions of spiritualist practice. Together, these figures helped Brown create a unique and enduring legacy that bridged the gap between spiritualist intuition and scientific inquiry, ensuring her work remained a vital force in the evolution of the spiritualist movement. The later years and enduring legacy of Rosemary Brown. As Rosemary Brown entered the 1970s, her role in the spiritualist movement had evolved beyond that of an active medium and public commentator. While she continued to be involved in spiritualist circles and engaged with emerging research on consciousness and psychic phenomena, her approach became more introspective, emphasizing a deepened philosophical and spiritual inquiry. The decade marked a shift in her public presence, as she became more selective in her media appearances and focused on refining her core teachings rather than expanding her influence through external platforms. This period saw her retreat from the more vocal debates and public engagements that had characterized her earlier years, instead choosing to consolidate her ideas into written works that would endure beyond her lifetime. Her most significant contributions in these later years came in the form of reflective essays and collected writings that synthesized her decades of experience and philosophical development. In 1972, she published The Voice from the Other Side, a meditation on the nature of spiritual communication and the role of memory in shaping human consciousness. The book, published a year after the death of her longtime collaborator Harry Price, reflected on the intersection of spiritualist inquiry and empirical research, maintaining the balance of intellectual rigor and spiritual insight that had defined her earlier work. This period of writing and reflection solidified her reputation as not only a practitioner of spiritualism but also a thoughtful philosopher of consciousness and existence. In the 1980s, as the spiritualist movement continued to evolve in the face of new scientific and technological developments, Brown remained a guiding presence. While she no longer participated in public debates as frequently as she had in the 1950s and 1960s, she was still called upon to provide commentary on the philosophical and ethical dimensions of spiritualist practice. Her later writings often emphasize the need for a mature, self-aware approach to spiritual development, encouraging individuals to cultivate a balanced understanding of their own consciousness rather than seeking external validation through psychic experiences. This perspective was particularly influential in shaping the next generation of spiritualist thinkers, who sought to integrate spiritualism with emerging fields such as psychology, neuroscience, and quantum theory. Perhaps one of the most significant developments in Brown's later years was the renewed interest in her work by both academic and spiritualist communities. The 1980s and 1990s saw a growing acceptance of parapsychological research in certain scientific circles, and Brown's early work was increasingly referenced in discussions on the nature of consciousness and the boundaries of human experience. She was invited to contribute to anthologies on the history of spiritualism, and her writings were reprinted in both spiritualist publications and academic journals that explored the interplay between mysticism and empirical inquiry. In her final decade, as she neared the end of her life, Brown remained intellectually engaged and spiritually attuned. Her last major public appearance came in 1989 at a symposium on spiritual communication, where she spoke on the evolving nature of spiritualist thought and its relevance in an increasingly scientific and skeptical world. Her words reflected a deep conviction that the spiritual dimension of human existence was not something to be discarded, but rather integrated into a broader understanding of consciousness. In 1997, at the age of 81, she published one of her final works, Reflections on the Spiritual Path, a collection of essays that encapsulated a lifetime of inquiry, experience, and philosophical development. When Rosemary Brown passed away in 2001, she left behind a legacy that continued to shape the spiritualist movement. Her work was not only preserved through the institutions and networks she helped build, but also through the enduring influence of her philosophical insights. Scholars of parapsychology, spiritualist practitioners, and students of consciousness studies have continued to reference her contributions, recognizing the significance of her efforts in bridging the gap between empirical inquiry and spiritual experience.